Hello and welcome to this deep dive into the new Arpeggiator plugin in Divisimate 2. This new plugin has all the things you might expect from an Arpeggiator plugin and then some additional features that are extremely powerful and give you the freedom to create almost any kind of pattern or texture. When you consider that you can run many independent arpeggiators with different settings across different instruments at once, it opens up a ridiculous amount of possibilities. Just to get us started, here are some examples of orchestrations that can be built with this plugin. These were just two simple examples, but as you will see, you can go into many different directions with this. Some of the things that we explain in this video will be commonplace for people who have worked with arpeggiators before, so feel free to look at the video chapters to jump to the parts that you're interested in. Let's get into it and see how this plugin works. I'll start by routing 3 voices to my violins and inserting an Arpeggiator plugin. Here's what it sounds like in default position when I play a chord. So now let's look at the different controls. In the upper part of the UI, we have a number of controls that decide how the 3 notes I routed to the Arpeggiator will be arranged. There are 2 different modes to this panel, the basic mode and the expert mode. We will look at basic mode first and look at the expert mode a bit later. So these are the controls in basic mode. First off, we have a number of possible note orders. So up makes it play from the lowest note to highest note. And down works the other way around. And there's a number of other options here that you may be familiar from other arpeggiators out there. It also includes an all option that just plays the incoming notes as a chord. Then of course we have the rate, where you can play the same pattern faster or slower, choosing from a list of time divisions. And you can add a swing to it or let it play straight. The repeat option defines how often a specific note should be played before the arp is moving on to the next note. So with this you can build a nice measured tremolo effect by playing every note twice. If you set the octave control, you can let the arp repeat the same pattern across one or multiple octaves above or below. And then there's the pattern reset, which relates a bit to the lower part of the UI. So depending on your note order and the number of notes the arp has to work with, you'll end up with a pattern that does not fit neatly into your time signature. So if I got a 4/4 time signature and 16 steps down here, my 3-note pattern will shift around the downbeat of my measure. But with the pattern reset set to once, my note pattern will start fresh every time we get back to step 1. And with twice, it does that every second time it gets back to step 1. This is especially handy if the same arpeggiator may get a different number of notes throughout the performance and you want the resulting phrase to make some musical sense at all times. After all, a big part of the fun of arpeggiators can be to just throw something at it and see what pattern it comes up with based on the selected settings. On the lower side of the UI, we have a classic velocity stepper where you can adjust the rhythm and dynamics of your pattern with the note velocity. But you can also add up to 4 additional lanes with different CC or even pitch bend data that will be played back alongside the notes. You can just select the CC here, paint in a curve, and it will be sent out synchronized with your notes according to the grid. You can actually program dynamic swells, vibrato depth on different notes, or even subtle pitch bends into your pattern. This allows you to set up swirling pendulums like this. Let's look at some details. On the velocity stepper, you can click and drag on the steps to paint in different values for each step. On the right side of each step, you get a handle to change the width of the step, and you can even extend a step to the right for it to take up multiple subdivisions to build more complex rhythms. You can define the number of steps down here and add a second or a third page that allows you to build some really long and complex patterns if you want. And this slider down here is essentially defining the actual part that is being played back, like a loop slider. Here in the upper part of the UI, you have a slider that goes between ARP on the left and key or CC on the right. This is the dynamic scaling of the ARP. When you have this slider all the way to the left, the ARP will output exactly the velocity values displayed. When it's somewhere in the middle, the values will be scaled by either the key velocity of the individual note or a CC number that you specify here. So you could use the mod wheel to make your whole ARP louder or quieter. When the slider is all the way at the right, the ARP will pretty much ignore the stepper data and output the exact value of the controller of note velocity for each respective note as the velocity. As you can see, when you adjust the step width and you get really close to the next step, it snaps to it and you get this little connector icon down here. This one you can click to activate it, and that means that these notes will be played legato, meaning that the two notes will overlap. Now when you play with legato patches, they tend to add a little bit of latency where the legato transition is playing back. So it takes a little bit of time until the legato patch has properly arrived at the next note. But when you use that kind of patch in an arpeggiator, that means that the legato patch is constantly dragging behind. That's why we introduced the legato delay. When you have activated legato on any step, you will get this little value down here that defines how much the new legato note should be triggered ahead of time. So if I activate it just on this first step, these two notes will overlap just by extending this first step a tiny little bit. But it's still all on grid. Now, if I turn up the legato delay to 50 milliseconds, the note on step 2 will actually start 50 milliseconds before the grid. So if the legato transition of my instrument takes 50 milliseconds to play out, this note will now land properly on time. Here's an example of a legato patch played without legato, and with legato but no delay. And with the properly applied delay. There are some useful shortcuts in the lane editor that I want to share with you. Hold down Command on Mac or Control on Windows to edit all steps at the same time. This works for adjusting the length of the step and the height, and even for the legato connectors. Hold down the Alt key and click to reset the steps to their default value, or hold both modifier keys and click to reset all the steps. The same combination works on the CC lanes too. Alt drag on the envelope to reset parts of the curve, and Command Alt or Control Alt and click to reset the whole thing. You can also hold Command on Mac or Control on Windows and scroll with the mouse wheel to scale up the contents of your CC lane. And you can also use the right mouse button to draw straight lines. And as you work with the ARP, there will be a lot of situations where you are building interlocking patterns from multiple instruments. For example, having the violins playing one pattern and building something complementary for the violas. To properly work everything out, you can use this solo button up here to only hear the instrument you are currently working on. The solo goes away as soon as you close the plugin, so there's no risk of leaving it on accidentally. And of course, if you have built a pattern that you might want to reuse, you can use the plugin preset menu down here to save your settings and recall it anywhere else. Now finally, let's have a look at the most powerful and versatile tool, the expert mode. So like the controls in the basic mode, the expert mode is used to determine what exact note should be played on what step. But while the basic mode does so by note orders and basic rules, the expert mode lets you exactly set up what voice should sound when. When I switch modes, only the upper part of the UI changes, while all the lanes stay the same and work exactly the same way. The expert mode still has a rate and a swing setting and a dynamic scaling slider, though it is relegated to a much smaller space up here, and all other controls are gone to make room for the note editor. The way the editor looks depends on the number of voices you have routed to the Arpeggiator. Right now I have 4 voices routed to the instrument that has the Arpeggiator plugin, and those 4 voices show up here. If I were to take out voice 1, only voice 2, 3 and 4 would show up here. But let's stay with 4 voices for this demonstration. So next to these voice numbers for each step of the Arpeggiator, I have one node that I can activate and deactivate to have the specific voice play on this step. If I want the chord to be played from the highest note to lowest, I would start at voice 1 and work my way down, and then repeat the pattern. Now this I could much more easily do with the down note order in basic mode instead, so doing just this is a bit pointless. This mode is particularly useful for all the patterns that are more unique where you want that control. I can even activate multiple notes on a single step to have it play chords. Here are some examples of patterns that couldn't be programmed with the basic mode. But where it gets really interesting is when I click and drag on a note vertically. That's how I can transpose that specific note up or down. So this actually adds a possibility to program in little harmonic progressions, riffs and melodies. The little numbers represent halftone steps, and I can actually even have different transpositions on every single note, even within a step. Here are some more examples of things you could set up with that. These transpositions on the individual steps can actually also be locked to the global scale. This works the same way as the scale lock in the Transposer plugin. So instead of half steps, the numbers here represent scale degrees, and the resulting transposed notes will move in tonal relation to the current scale. If you want to know more about this kind of transposition, check out our video on the Transposer scale lock. We go into more detail there. Now, when you have built a pattern in expert mode that is really interesting, you have usually built it with a specific number of voices in mind. But depending on what you're playing and your Divisimate, not all voices are playing all the time. So the pattern might have a hole in it when voice 1 does not have a note at the time. What happened here is that when I moved from a 4-note chord to a 3-note chord, the first voice was left empty and those steps here didn't play. Sometimes that might be what you want. Sometimes you may want the rhythmic integrity of the pattern to be retained even though it's not going to be the exact melodic shape you programmed. So for this you can use this little fill voices icon over here. This activates effectively a tiny little fill voices algorithm for just this Arpeggiator that fills up the empty voices in expert mode by duplicating the existing notes. So you hear, instead of staying silent on the second chord, these steps just play one of the other notes instead. This is not the default setting, so you can decide for yourself on what pattern this makes sense and on which riffs or phrases you actually want things to stick exactly to the notes as played and programmed. And that's it. Those are the features of our new Arpeggiator plugin. I hope you can see the massive potential that this plugin opens up for building orchestrations and textures with Divisimate. For a good example of how this can sound when it is really fine-tuned and built to a template, revisit our first teaser video for Divisimate 2. It really showcases how the Arpeggiator can create textures during a live performance. And of course, there will be presets available for our templates that make use of this new plugin in the future. But for this video, that is all. Thank you for watching and see you on the next one.